What if I told you that some of the most horrific crimes in human history happened in places so secret that even today, most people have never heard their names? While the world knows about Auschwitz and Treblinka, there were other camps, hidden deep in forests and remote corners of occupied Europe, where the Nazi regime conducted experiments and exterminations so disturbing that they tried to erase every trace of their existence. These weren't just concentration camps. These were laboratories of death, designed to disappear without a trace, taking their victims' stories with them into silence. Before we dive into this dark chapter of history that was deliberately hidden from the world, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories from history that need to be remembered. Between 1939 and 1945, Nazi Germany constructed a vast network of camps across occupied Europe. Most people are familiar with the major death camps like Auschwitz-Birkenau, where over 1 million people were murdered, or Dachau, the first concentration camp established by the Nazi regime. But what many don't realize is that, alongside these infamous sites, the Nazis operated dozens of smaller, more secretive facilities. These hidden camps serve specific purposes in the regime's machinery of genocide, purposes so sinister that the Nazis went to extraordinary lengths to keep them secret, even from their own population. In the final years of the war, as defeat became inevitable, SS units received explicit orders to destroy these camps completely, to burn the evidence, to kill the remaining witnesses, and to leave nothing behind that could tell the story of what happened there. Some of these places were wiped off the map so thoroughly that it took historians decades to piece together what occurred within their barbed wire fences. The question that haunts us today is simple, yet terrifying. If they went to such lengths to hide these places, what horrors were they trying to conceal? In the dense forests of occupied Poland, far from major cities and prying eyes, the Nazis established a series of camps that existed outside the normal concentration camp system. These facilities operated under code names, their true purposes known only to a select group of SS officers and Nazi leadership. One such place was Sobibór, a name that means nothing to most people today, yet it was one of the most efficient killing centers ever created. Unlike Auschwitz, which combined forced labor with extermination, camps like Sobibór had only one purpose: death. Prisoners who arrived at these secret camps weren't registered, weren't tattooed with numbers, weren't assigned to barracks. They were murdered within hours, sometimes within minutes, of arrival. The Nazis called this Operation Reinhard, a bureaucratic name for the systematic murder of Polish Jews. But Operation Reinhard camps were just one type of secret facility. There were medical experimentation camps, where doctors performed procedures without anesthesia on conscious prisoners. There were camps dedicated solely to executing political prisoners and resistance fighters. Places where people vanished without their families ever learning their fate. And then there were the euthanasia centers, the precursors to the death camps, where the Nazi regime perfected their killing techniques on disabled Germans before expanding the program to genocide. What happened inside these hidden facilities pushed the boundaries of human cruelty to places most of us cannot even imagine. The survivors who emerged from these places carried stories so horrifying that many couldn't speak about them for decades. Some never spoke at all, taking their trauma to the grave because the memories were too painful to voice. The few testimonies we have paint a picture of systematic dehumanization, industrial-scale murder, and calculated cruelty that defies comprehension. But here's what makes these secret camps even more disturbing. They were designed from the beginning to leave no witnesses, no evidence, no trace that they ever existed. Let me take you inside one of these hidden facilities to understand what really happened there. Camp Bełżec, located in a remote area of southeastern Poland, began operations in March 1942. This wasn't a large camp by Nazi standards. It covered only about 15 acres, roughly the size of 10 football fields. Yet in just 9 months of operation, approximately 600,000 people were murdered there. That's more than 2,000 people killed every single day. Unlike the better-known camps, Bełżec had almost no survivors. Only 7 people are confirmed to have escaped and lived to testify about what they witnessed. The camp's design revealed its true purpose. Trains arrived at a small station, disguised to look like a normal railway stop, complete with fake ticket windows and painted signs directing passengers to connecting trains. This elaborate deception was intentional, designed to keep victims calm until the very last moment. Once people disembarked, they were rushed through a process the Nazis cynically called the tube, a narrow, fenced pathway leading directly to the gas chambers. Guards told prisoners they were going to shower and delouse before being sent to work camps. People were ordered to undress, to tie their shoes together so they wouldn't be lost, to remember where they placed their belongings. This cruel charade continued right up until the steel doors of the gas chambers sealed shut. Rudolf Raeder, one of the only survivors, later testified about the sounds that filled the camp constantly. He described hearing screams that seemed to never stop, engines running continuously to pump carbon monoxide into the chambers, and the terrible silence that followed each gassing, broken only by the commands barked at the Sonderkommando, prisoners forced to remove bodies and search them for hidden valuables. Raeder worked in the camp for months, witnessing transport after transport arrive, unload, and disappear into the gas chambers. He described how the Nazis had refined the process to brutal efficiency, how they could murder an entire transport of 2,000 people in less than 3 hours from arrival to cremation. But Belzec was just one of several Operation Reinhard camps. Sobibór and Treblinka operated with similar efficiency, similar deception, and similar brutality. Together, these 3 camps murdered approximately 1.7 million people, yet they operated for less than 2 years before being completely dismantled. The medical experimentation camps represented another category of hidden horror. At Neuengamme, a concentration camp near Hamburg, prisoners were infected with tuberculosis, typhoid, and other diseases, so doctors could test experimental treatments. At Ravensbrück, the women's concentration camp, doctors performed unnecessary surgeries on healthy prisoners to simulate battlefield wounds, then tested different treatment methods while the victims suffered without proper anesthesia. These weren't rogue doctors acting alone. These experiments were sanctioned, funded, and documented by Nazi medical authorities who viewed camp prisoners as readily available test subjects with no human rights. Dr. Sigmund Rasche conducted high-altitude and freezing experiments at Dachau, subjecting prisoners to conditions that simulated being shot down over the North Sea, or bailing out at extreme altitudes. Prisoners were placed in pressure chambers until they died, or submerged in tanks of ice water, while doctors carefully documented how long it took them to lose consciousness and die. The stated purpose was to help. German pilots and sailors survived similar conditions, but the experiments were conducted with such cruelty, such complete disregard for human suffering, that they served no legitimate scientific purpose. They were torture, dressed up as medical research. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these secret camps wasn't just what happened inside them. It was the systematic attempt to make them disappear entirely. In 1943, as the tide of war turned against Germany, Heinrich Himmler initiated Action 1005, an operation specifically designed to destroy evidence of mass murder. SS units were dispatched to death camps and killing sites across occupied Europe, with orders to exhume mass graves, burn the bodies, crush the remaining bones to powder, and scatter the ashes. At Bełżec, the Nazis spent months digging up approximately 600,000 bodies, burning them on massive pyres, then planting trees and establishing a fake farm on the site. A Ukrainian guard was installed as the farmer, living there to maintain the deception that the camp had never existed. Similar destruction occurred at Sobibór and Treblinka. Buildings were demolished, gas chambers dismantled, railway spurs torn up, and every structure burned. The goal was to create plausible deniability, to ensure that even if Germany lost the war, there would be insufficient evidence to prove what had happened, and it nearly worked. When Soviet forces liberated these areas, they found almost nothing, just disturbed earth, scattered ashes, and occasionally a few overlooked personal items belonging to the dead. The camp at Hartheim Castle in Austria represented yet another dimension of Nazi secrecy. This Renaissance castle was converted into a euthanasia center, where at least 30,000 people were murdered between 1940 and 1944. The victims included disabled children, mentally ill adults, and concentration camp prisoners deemed too sick or weak to work. This was where the Nazis first developed and perfected the gas chamber technology they would later deploy in the death camps. Families of disabled children would receive letters informing them that their child had died of pneumonia or some other illness, never knowing their loved one had been deliberately murdered as part of the regime's racial purification program. The castle's basement contained a gas chamber disguised as a shower room and a crematorium where bodies were burned immediately after death. Documentation was meticulously falsified. Death certificates listed false causes of death, medical records were fabricated, and the true nature of the facility was hidden behind the bureaucratic language of special treatment and mercy killing. After the war, many of the doctors and nurses who worked at Hartheim returned to normal medical practice. Their involvement in mass murder concealed by destroyed records and a conspiracy of silence. Despite the Nazis' efforts to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses, the truth eventually emerged. Soviet forces discovered the remains of Bełżec, Sobibór, and Treblinka, though the camps had been so thoroughly destroyed that it took forensic investigators years to understand the full scale of what had occurred there. Survivor testimonies, though few, provided crucial evidence. Rudolf Rader's account of Bełżec, published in 1946, offered one of the first detailed descriptions of an Operation Reinhard camp. The handful of survivors from Sobibór, particularly those who participated in the camp's uprising and mass escape in October 1943, preserved the memory of that place when the Nazis wanted it forgotten. Archaeological excavations at these sites, some conducted as recently as the 2010s, continue to uncover evidence that confirms and expands upon survivor testimonies. At Sobibór, archaeologists discovered the remains of the gas chambers in 2014, buried exactly where survivors had described them. The Nuremberg trials and subsequent proceedings brought some perpetrators to justice, though many escaped accountability, particularly those involved in the euthanasia program, which the Nazi regime had kept carefully compartmentalized and secret, even from much of its own bureaucracy. These secret camps represent something profoundly disturbing about human nature and organized evil. They show us that genocide isn't just about hatred exploding in spontaneous violence. It's about bureaucracy, planning, and systematic dehumanization. It's about ordinary people participating in extraordinary evil, then going home to their families as if nothing unusual had happened. The Nazis tried to hide these places because they knew, even in their moment of power, that what they were doing was wrong. That history would judge them, that evidence of their crimes would condemn them. They failed to erase the evidence completely, but they succeeded in obscuring many details, in ensuring that some victims' names would never be known, some camps' full death tolls would never be calculated, and some perpetrators would never face justice. We remember these places not to dwell on darkness, but because forgetting would mean the Nazis partially succeeded in their cover-up. Every name we recover, every testimony we preserve, every hidden camp we excavate and document, is an act of resistance against the erasure they attempted. History is not just the past. It's a warning. It shows us how easily ordinary institutions can be twisted toward evil, how silence enables atrocity, and why we must always question, always remember, and always bear witness. If you found this story important, hit the like button, share it with others who need to understand this history, and subscribe for more true accounts from history's darkest chapters that must never be forgotten. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. How do we ensure that future generations remember these hidden stories? The conversation continues with you.